This is Duke University.
Today's Duke Magazine Forum was inspired by our panelist, Charlie Clotfelter, and his newly published book, Big Time Sports in American Universities. Charlie, in the book, analyzes a divide that's unique to American universities. These places are dedicated to the creation and diffusion of knowledge, but at the same time, they are also places that have embraced the entertainment value of big-time sports. Many decades ago, the famous cultural theorist C.P. Snow asked if science and the humanities can coexist. Well, today, Charlie asks us to consider another curious coexistence. So let me introduce our moderator, Jim Coleman of the Duke Law School. Jim's depth and range as a scholar, legal practitioner, teacher, and justice seeker makes him especially well-suited to take us over the goal line of college sports, the economics, ethics, and excesses of the games we love. Jim.
Thank you, and thank all of you for joining us today. The turnout is an indication of how special sports are in universities in this country. The format for our discussion is that I will introduce the panelists. Each of them will make 2 to 3 minutes of remarks. I will then ask a single question, which I'll pose to all of the panelists, and after they respond, we will then take questions from you. And we're hoping to do this in a way that we're going to have a decent amount of time left to hear what's on your mind so that the panelists can address it. If you wanted to know what's going on in college sports today, all you have to do is to read the headlines. The following are headlines that appeared over the last year, some of them very recently, that shows you the range of things and issues that college athletics are having to deal with. First, the Aggies beat Irish for first NC2A title. UNC admits to academic misconduct in football program. NC2A conference realignment, winners and losers. What's missing from March Madness? Better academics. As colleges compete, major money flows to minor sports, ambition beyond athletics, and then finally, Kyrie Irving is leaving Duke for the NBA draft. The important question that these headlines pose for universities such as Duke is reflected in the title of a report recently released by the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics, Restoring the Balance, Dollars, Values, and the Future of College Sports. We are fortunate to have several individuals who have been at the very center of these issues and who will share their perspectives on the overarching question of balance in college sports. First, Charlie Clotfelter is the Z. Smith Reynolds Professor of Public Policies and Professor of Economics and Law here at Duke. His recently published book, Big Time Sports in American Universities, has received a great deal of attention both here at Duke and around the country. Seated next to Charlie is Alan Fishel, who is a partner in the Washington, D.C. law firm of Arent Fox. His practice focuses on telecommunications, sports law, antitrust, and consumer protection. He is currently lead counsel in a matter concerning the Bowl Championship Series. Next to Alan is Nancy Hogshead-Makar, who is a professor at the Florida Coastal School of Law and one of the premier experts on Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. She is a former president of the Women's Sports Foundation and is currently the foundation's senior director of advocacy. She is also the lead author of the book NC2A Pregnant and Parenting Student Athletes, resources, and model policies. And then finally, Chris Kennedy is the Deputy Director of Duke Athletics and has been a part of the Duke Athletics staff since 1977. He's been instrumental in maintaining the integrity of the Duke athletic program, both the academic achievement of our student athletes and the compliance of our athletic programs with the rules that govern intercollegiate sports. So we'll begin with Charlie.
Thank you, Jim. Like a lot of people out in this audience and around this university, I took it for granted as I grew up that teams representing universities like Georgia Tech and Duke would play each other in games with many thousands of people at the stadium, listened to by people on radio, and widely reported in newspapers. But if you think about it, it's a little bit strange to have institutions that are dedicated to research and teaching and service to also be in the commercial sports business. Well, they've been this way for almost a century. And in fact, the United States is the only country in the world that has universities that do commercial sports. In my research, I looked to see if this thing really is a big deal the way I thought it was when I went to Grant Field in Atlanta to see Bobby Dodd's football team. Well, it is a big deal. Here's a couple of examples of kind of measures that I look for. I looked at a whole year of New York Times articles about any one of 58 universities, all with big-time football and basketball programs. Duke is included in that. There were 601 articles in the very serious New York Times. 87% of those had to do with athletics. Another thing, a little bit more modern, I said, I wonder who gets more Google hits, the president or the football coach or the basketball coach. It turns out in these 58 universities, the average ratio of football coach hits on Google to the president was 7-to-1. Only 2 of the 58 universities did the president get more Google hits than the football coach. In basketball, it was a little bit less. It was 4-to-1. You might wonder what it is at Duke. It turns out that our football coach out-Googles our esteemed president by almost 2-to-1. Basketball, it's more. 13-to-1. And then think about salaries. Forget about it. The salaries of football coaches and basketball coaches have skyrocketed. In 24 years, if you take inflation into account and you make these as comparable as you can, at 44 universities, it turns out that football coaches' salaries went up 650%, and where university presidents only went up by 90%. So let me just finish by saying the thing about this bigness is contrasted by the research done by scholars like me. You can look at entire volumes about research on universities, and you can look at research on admissions and new realms of knowledge and interdisciplinary work. You can go and look at entire volumes and not see the first mention of intercollegiate athletics. It's almost as if this topic is verboten. You look at university mission statements, and it's the very rare mission statement that mentions athletics, let alone big-time sports. So that was the paradox that got me working on this thing. How can this be so big yet ignored?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Alan Fishel, and I graduated from Duke Law School in 1986. And one of the things I learned there is whatever you do, and this is a simple point, you learn all this law, but it's really try to make sure that when you're representing people, you're trying to represent people who you believe are on the right side of things as much as possible. And it's given me such a pleasure to represent a tremendous group of people, both at the Mountain West Conference, which is, has a lot of universities that you've all, are aware of, and also Boise State with respect to issues relating to the Bowl Championship Series. I've been doing this work for a few years now. I've met with the Department of Justice on numerous occasions. They're still deciding, and I can't get into the details, whether to bring a formal investigation into the BCS and to look into this. I think if they actually do bring a formal investigation, I think things will change, and I think they'll change in a way that probably 90% of the fans would want, and I think a lot of the players would want. I think the thing going on is, obviously, after just hearing from Charlie, you're thinking, well, now I'm talking about a bigger setup, a playoff or the like. But I think the important thing here is to keep in mind that what we're looking to do is make sure we're teaching kids the right lessons. It's so important that they leave here looking at the people above them and learning from them what we want them to learn, rather than something that we don't. And what I mean by that is, right now you have a situation in which, however you want to structure this, whether you want to go back to the old system or whether you want to go to a playoff, a lot of people could live with either. But I think the current system, we struggle with it because the bottom line is certain teams, certain players, certain individuals will never have a chance. And I know from talking to friends and everyone else how hard they work all year to try to win a football championship, and yet their teams are eliminated before the season even begins. And that's tough on those people. And frankly, we teach in the classroom that you do your best, you're perfect, you're going to have a chance to really succeed. And here, you're kind of being kept a level down from that. And so that's one of the things we're sort of looking into. And in addition, with only, and when you combine the academics and the athletics, you're also looking at the fact that if we're going to have athletic departments, it would be great if there was a way that they would actually not lose money and drain from the academic side. One of the ways for them not to lose money is to end up having some sort of playoff that'll bring in pretty much probably close to $1 billion a year in the not too distant future, which money would be then split among 120 schools, could raise so much extra money that would help tremendously with not only athletics, but academics, with tutoring, with balancing budgets and the like. And so those are sorts of some of the things we're looking into. Now, if you're saying, well, why are you at the Justice Department? Obviously, my clients, so this is the Mountain West and Boise State, think that what's going on here is an antitrust violation. We strongly believe it. Obviously, people at the BCS feel differently. But it's been a very interesting, conversations, very interesting discussions. And I'll finish with this. When I go to a party and I tell people what I do, once or twice they'll say, I disagree with you. And the reason they tell me that is because they misunderstood what I said, and they thought I said I represent the BCS.
My name is Nancy Hogshead-Makar, and I am a professor of law and the senior director of advocacy for the Women's Sports Foundation. So you're probably wondering, what does women's sports have to say about all this? And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the educational mission of athletics. We've known for a long time that including football and basketball, including every sport, that athletes, particularly in high school, they do much better in school. They get better grades, better standardized test scores, are more likely to go into college, on and on. We've known this for a long, long time. Recently, a researcher named Betsy Stevenson did some research using Title IX, looking at what happened with Department of Education data. Before Title IX, you had very few women in high school. I think it was about less than 300,000 in high school. And very quickly they jumped up, but they jumped up very differently for different states. So some states were offering over 100% of their student body with sports opportunities. So imagine one kid can count 3 times. They can play 3 sports. Other states, like my state, the state of Florida, were representing, had less than 30% of their student body playing sports. And again, one kid can take 3 of those spots, so it's a very tiny percentage. So looking at those different rates and how far that each state had to grow with its women's athletic participation, what did this then mean for our economy? And what it meant was women who participated in sports, in high school sports, not only do they get more education, even when you take out the fact of the kind of family that they came from, urban, rural, or suburban school, whether the parents had a library card, how much education their parents had, even when you factor out all those variables, they got more education. They were much more likely to go into non-traditional fields of engineering and science and medicine and law. They're far more likely to be full-time employees with higher wages. So Title IX gave her this opportunity to look at this. She had the sort of, Title IX didn't exist, and all of a sudden, wham, you had so many girls who were participating in sports over a very short period of time. And, but there's no reason to think that the same thing wouldn't be true for boys as well. You just don't have the same ability to look at this. So sports for women have been a real opportunity for them to be part of a game that has made lifelong changes for the rest of their lives. Now, what's happening right now with intercollegiate athletics, two sports, according to the Knight Commission here, are the runaway freight train when it comes to their expenses. Yes, they're bringing in more money, but they're spending more than they're making. And when you talk about revenue, that revenue includes donations. The revenue includes the tax that's really on kids, on the other students. It includes the student fees that go into that. If you take out the 14 schools right now that are currently in the black in their athletic department, the average loss is $10 million from academics over into athletics, $10 million per year. So the educational model is obviously one that is a valid, it is a valid and very important one. And the latest discussions that have to do with whether or not we're going to be paying athletes want to take an educational model that we have for athletics, an educational model, and they want to put it into the business model. Okay, so I'm fine either way, but if you're going to be a business model, then there's going to be taxes. And you can't build facilities with tax-free bonds. And you don't have this thing called donors. And you don't get to tax students as part of that. So if it's a business model, then it's the NBA, it's the NFL. But if it's part of education, then women have every right to that same experience. We're using our tax dollars for that, to that same experience that what boys have always enjoyed. The myth is that if there was more money in the system, then things would be fairer. So this is where I disagree. Sure. That what money has shown to do is, right now the SEC spends $122,000 per athlete per year. So they're putting more and more money into fewer and fewer athletes. So rather than expanding the pie, you could, most of these schools, particularly BCS schools, they could triple the size of their athletic department and still not satisfy demand. But they're going to a model that's very expensive, and it's all about recruiting the athletes rather than on making a better athlete or making a better product, something that's more interesting for everybody here to watch. So we have two different models here, and right now what's happening with BCS sports is they are extracting as much power as they can over two lost antitrust lawsuits. And they're sort of, wedging in there as much as they can for, it's hard to say what the educational value is, what we all here are foregoing our tax dollars for this endeavor here to spend $122,000 per athlete per year. So I'm very much want to see whatever happens with this model to make sure that the educational part of athletics stays pure and stays as true as possible. So, thank you.
Pleased to report, first of all, that Nancy, who was a student when I ran the academic support program in the athletic department, wrote that book without any help from me. Very proud of that.
No, but he did edit my papers my freshman year, 1980.
I want to back up a little and provide a little historical perspective. And Charlie and I have talked about this a little bit. Lately, I've been digging around in the university archives around the early years of Trinity College football, and the ban of football and the reinstatement. And I started doing it for various nefarious fundraising reasons. But the English professor side of me sort of took over, and I got interested in some things. And our perspective sometimes is that college athletics is becoming ever more corrupt. More cheating, more recruiting violations, more ineligible players, more academic fraud, and so on. William Randolph Few, who was president of Trinity College and then later oversaw the transformation of Trinity College to Duke University, wrote an article in 1906, South Atlantic Quarterly, called Excessive Devotion to Athletics. And in it, he talks about the use of ineligible players, the desire for victory at all costs, and how this excessive devotion to athletics has done considerable harm to American education. Same article, though, he says, but college athletics have a value that deserves to be protected from the He said, the evils that now actually beset them and the perils that lie in the future for them. So President Few was no apologist for athletics, but he understood the value of athletics in an educational setting, kept in perspective and properly managed. My point is that it's a much bigger operation than it used to be. As Nancy points out, it's a much more expensive operation than it used to be. It's a much more expensive operation than it was when I started. But that the thirst for victory, the desire to win, the desire for your group, whatever it is, to be better than other groups, is nothing new. I mean, it's animated athletics forever. I mean, Coach Bueller, who teaches the history of sport, sitting in the audience, can tell you that cheating is as old as the Greek Olympics. You know, even the concept of the dumb jock, it comes from antiquity. There was a wrestler, famous wrestler in the Olympics, the Greek Olympics, called Milo of Croton. And Milo once boasted that he could pick up a bull, carry it all around the stadium in Sparta or someplace, and butcher it on the spot. And some Stoic philosopher said, well, yeah, that might be true, but the bull, when it was alive, could have done it with a lot less effort and about the same amount of brain power. So the problems are of a bigger magnitude, but they're the same problems. You know, we wrestle with the same issues today that President Few wrestled with in the beginning of the century, at the beginning of Duke University, and at the very calculated decision to bring Wallace Wade to Duke and to emphasize specifically football at the time, but the athletic side of the university, because he believed, he said in a letter to his daughter, that he had always placed the moral and the physical above the intellectual in the education of boys.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so here's my question to the panelists. They've not heard this, and it's a two-part question, and give us a brief answer, and then following their responses, we're going to give you an opportunity to ask questions. So the question is, what's the one change that could be made in college sports that you believe would have the greatest positive impact? And then the second part is, explain briefly why you believe such a change will or will not happen in the near future.
Is this a change that would be desirable?
Yes, positive, that will have a positive.
Because I can give an answer, but here's my answer that I think paying players would have a tremendous effect, but I don't think that it would be a wise thing to do.
Okay.
What change? This is like, okay. Yeah. I would say something on the order of, let's be candid about the true role of commercial sports in our universities. If you look at American universities, we hold 17 of the top 20 spots in the world. So American universities are doing very well. We could do better, but we are the envy of the world. Of those 17 universities, 5 of them have big-time sports. So it's clear that you can run a university with big-time sports. But what's going on right now is a curious silence about the role of commercial sports in our university. Duke University is in the entertainment business. And we ought to just admit that and then go on and have a discussion that's worthy of our own traditions of truth-telling. And we ought to say, okay, we're doing this, and this is the reason why we have these trade-offs. So what good would that do? I think it would, when you get to issues such as, should the NCAA, that is our universities, be advertising beer on television? Is it right for our universities to forbid the writing under your eye in the dark spot? You can't now put Psalms 23:1 as you used to be able to do. It's against the rules. But if your university is sponsored by Nike, you have to put the swoosh on, and you can't cover it up. So I think the good thing that would come out of a candid recognition is an honest discussion about the pros and cons.
Okay, thank you. Al?
Thanks. I'm going to give 2 quick ones, one because it's related to what I'm doing and one which isn't. I think the one that's not is the NCAA really needs to make its rules a whole lot clearer. I think they then need to try to do much better with consistent enforcement. I think right now, from everything we've seen in the last year, The enforcement's inconsistent. The enforcement is delayed, which one can really question. And I've heard complaints after complaints over the years about how the NCAA rules, are the same size as the IRS tax code and completely, not understandable. And so I think really there needs to be a lot there that needs to get changed. Without getting back into the BCS, and Nancy, I want to say, I agree with you, we need to reel in expenses. I totally agree with that. We could raise the revenue 1,000-fold. If we don't reel in expenses, expenses will exceed it. My thought is we're probably not going to get expenses further down, so we need to at least make revenues get up there and then start constraining them. But I think there needs to be intellectual honesty in sports. And what you have right now with the Bowl Championship Series and maybe some other things is simply a place where people aren't really being intellectually honest. The way I would look at it would be anybody can say whatever they want about the Bowl Championship Series, and the response from the people of the Bowl Championship Series is sort of a one-sentence conclusion on whatever conclusion they want to give. It would be similar to if I told you the Earth is flat and you showed me constant pictures that it wasn't, and all I did was keep saying the Earth is flat to enough people and hired enough PR people that a lot of people are saying, wow, and I see your pictures, but I'm hearing all over the radio the Earth's flat. It's similar to that. And I think, what, in the business world, I don't agree with that, others might. But I'll tell you, in the educational world, I think it's not even a close call, and I think we need to kind of make sure we get the intellectual honesty we need.
If there's one change that we could do that would make the biggest difference, it was to decouple this idea of winning with more money from the NCAA. So if money was given out, not based on win-loss records, but based on things like graduation rates, if it was based on things like compliance with gender equity, if it was based on, you could come up with any rubric that you want to, but as long as money is derived from win-loss records, as Chris was saying, it's like we can't be saved from ourselves. We like to say in athletics that in the bell-shaped curve, that the tail is very long. And the difference between those top 10 athletes and the next 10 athletes is enormous. There's a huge gulf, and the next 10, right? So everybody's out there trying to recruit that top 10. So he said to constrain costs, right now, it's impossible to constrain costs. The NCAA lost 2 major antitrust lawsuits, one called Board of Regents, which said that the NCAA can't put any constraints on television contracts and television revenues. So that's why you got the big conference system right now. And the second one had to do with coaching salaries. So the NCAA tried to say the lowest ranking basketball coach was going to get paid a certain amount of money. Well, they lost to the tune of, was it 42 million?
Something like that, law case, yeah.
Yeah, right, NCAA versus law, or law versus NCAA. So when it comes to the spending, when it comes to the commercial part, NCAA completely powerless. They can't do anything about it. So it's not until we have some kind of change from outside the system, whether it be your group or whether it be some kind of antitrust exemption, or whether it be just a fund, one that Secretary of Education Arne Duncan just recommended, that money not be able to go, you not be able to play if you don't have a certain graduation rate, and 2 is that money doesn't get based on these win-loss records, because so much money of how much is spent is based on, come to our school, and we'll treat you like a prince. Come to our school, and we'll treat you like a king. Our school, a czar. Our school is, right? You're Gaddafi. So, and sort of all these ancillary problems that creates, not the least of which is the risk of sexual assault to women on campus by athletes on all-male teams. The risk of sexual harassment, of sexual assault by women from men is many times higher than is for the general student population with other athletes. And part of that stems from the Lisa Simpson versus University of Colorado case. Basically, the recruits were told, "Hey, you come here, you get laid," and Lisa Simpson got raped as a result of their attempts to try to recruit these athletes. So everybody's trying to get these very few athletes that are out there, and they're spending a lot of money that have nothing to do with making a better product, nothing to do with making, as an athlete myself, I can tell you what it takes to be a great athlete. It does not take $122,000 a year. be a great athlete. I can't imagine something that's consistent with any kind of educational mission. I mean, just being clear. But until we decouple, the one change we could do is decouple winning with revenue.
I'm backing up from ancient Greece to now. And as somebody who spent more than 30 years thinking about the welfare of individual student athletes, I mean, one of the things that has changed over the years from when I played a long time ago, and even from when Nancy was here, is the amount of time we demand of our kids. And in theory, they can't put in more than 20 hours a week, but that's only for required things. Voluntary things, they can spend all the time they want or they think they need to. And it isn't just the amount of time in a week or a day, it's the amount of time in a year. You know, the football players don't go home anymore. They're here all summer so that they can voluntarily work out. In combination with, and this is, I'm talking about nationally here now, in combination with attention to admission standards, I think that would make perhaps not a visible, as dramatically a visible difference, but internally, to admit students who more closely fit the profile of the rest of your student body, and then to give them the time to study, be regular college students, go home for a while in the summer, and so on. It's particularly in football and basketball. But what happens in football and basketball trickles down to the other sports. And so the experience of a soccer player now is very different than it was 30 years ago, and very similar to what a football player's experience was then. So I think this is not a front page dramatic thing, but if, you know, I've talked for a long time about finding ways to give kids their lives back.
Okay, thank you. So now we'll have questions from you, and you can address them to the panel in general or to particular individuals, and each panelist will keep his or her answer short so that we can get as many questions in as possible.
Yes, thank you. My name is Beth Ray Schroeder. I'm class of '83 and I work with the Duke Alumni Association. And we're streaming this program live, so we ask that you come to the students holding the microphones to ask your questions. We have another 145 people joining us online, and we have a question tweeted in from Deersport. With the two prongs of Title IX weaker, as in the Brown case, will schools like UNC be out of compliance while male-heavy Georgia Tech is in compliance?
I take it that question's for me.
Yes.
Right, so there are different ways that schools can come into compliance. I don't think most people are really interested in the technicalities, but one of the ways that schools can be in compliance is if their student body ratio matches their athlete ratio. So certainly if a school is heavy on, has a lot of men in it, whatnot, it makes fair to allocate these resources to give. Athletics are the only place in all of education and probably no place in business that are formally sex segregated. And that's what drives people a little crazy when they think about it, especially when the programs don't look the same. So men have some sports and women have very different sports over here. So it's not like you're comparing apples and apples here. But it makes sense that to give boys and girls, if they're complying under prong one, the same opportunity, one out of every, for most BCS schools, it's about one out of every, it's 2 out of every 100 students who are at the school get to have this sports experience. It's a highly rationed type of educational experience that we have there. So yeah, so it would be different for different schools.
Yes, over here.
Hi, my name's Bo Dewar in class 91. I'm known on Twitter as Dewar Sport. That was actually my question. And I'm a sports writer, so I've gone into way too much detail with it. I've actually argued with the College Sports Council, which I'm sure you're too familiar with, and also talked about it with people I've covered, like Randy Chastain and Julie Foudy. And the reason I asked that question is that it's something that's always nagged at me a little bit about Title IX enforcement, which is that Georgia Tech isn't primarily an engineering school. We have trouble getting women into engineering. And so it seems to me that in an ideal situation, we would ask Georgia Tech, please add more women's programs. You're in compliance with the proportionality prong right now, but please add more women's programs so maybe we can attract more women to your school. Whereas a school like UNC, which I just read Anson Dorrance's book, when he started it was maybe 90% male and now it's about 40% male. It's been very successful attracting female students and female student athletes in, and if it gets to where proportionality is the big prong that they need to follow, then they could be sort of a victim of their own success and be out of compliance. So I was wondering how you would address those.
Well, what the student body ratio is typically determined by what kinds of majors that the school has, and how different kinds of recruiting tactics, different kinds of different weights that schools give to different. So what the student body is I would argue is not driven at all by what the student athlete ratio is, because there's such at University of Florida, you have only 1.4% of the student body is an athlete. It's at University of Texas, it's less than that. At Duke, I believe it's less than 10%. So the student body population isn't dictating, the student athletes is not dictating over here what the student body population is. This idea that, right now women are about 57% of the student body in the country, and they represent only 43% of the student athletes in college athletics, only 43%. And the difference between men and women really has not changed much at all in about 10 years. So it's not like women are gaining at the expense of men. Women are not gaining, they're both gaining actually. If you look at the growth patterns for both men and women in high school and college, according to the NCAA, the NAIA, and the National High School Athletic Foundation, everybody's growing. Even in this hard economic times, rates are going up for both boys and girls.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I consider this a really interesting and very honest dialogue, and it's not happening in enough schools, and it's not happening enough in our world. I mean, just to kind of get it a little bit larger. But one of the things that kind of saddens me, I'm at my 50th reunion, is I remember the basketball team was really wonderful 50 years ago. We were all very excited and proud. But it wasn't the most important thing about Duke. And I really feel, having been out and in living different parts of the world, and people, I would go places, say I graduated from Duke. Great basketball team. And I think, well, yeah, there's some of us who did other things as well. So at any rate, excuse me. But the question I really have is, maybe we really need to look at not numbers or statistics, but the fact that athletes have become huge celebrities in our society. And it starts when they're in high school, and they start recruiting them in high school. I sat on the plane yesterday coming here, and there was a young boy sitting next to me. He was 13 years old, and he's already competing with a national team in soccer. OMG. I mean, this child is literally traveling all over the United States. It's being sponsored by Nike. No, I think he said to me, he said, boy, this is really interesting. I get to go to different places. But I guess I'm concerned about what's happened to our value system. It used to be like the most incredible honor to get into Duke because of your academic, because you were a hardworking young person who came from all over the country and other countries, and we're going to be contributing to society. I mean, there used to be that term. You don't hear talk about what great engineers Duke is producing or mathematicians. And so I guess that's my real concern, is I think the schools have to start looking at what are our values, that young people are seeing the most important thing is to be a successful athlete, not just an athlete, successful, and that's usually financial. So that's my concern.
Okay, Charlie, you want to?
Just from the standpoint of our educational setup in this country, the OECD publishes comparisons of educational attainment across countries. And what has happened to the United States in the last 2 decades is chilling. We were one of the leading countries in terms of educational attainment 20 and 30 years ago. Now we have been caught up in and really superseded by about a dozen countries. even though we do have some of the world's greatest universities, it's a little troubling to look at how we are falling back. And one of the reasons we have such great universities is that we are attracting the best minds from India and China and around the world. We have to look at our own garden and see how our young people are proceeding in finishing high school and finishing college. And so I think the question really does relate to our relative emphasis on educational attainment and athletics. One of the things that my colleague Phil Cook has worked on and wrote a book a few years back called The Winner-Take-All Society is that we have a winner-take-all market force really pushed to a large extent by mass media, which makes it very lucrative to be at the top. And if we look at our income distribution, it has gone the same way the coaching salaries versus the full professors has gone in the last 20 years. And so I think that the issue there is not anything that we can easily fix, but I think those of us in education need to be aware of it. And again, I'd come back to this theme of my book doesn't really have a bottom line about what the fix will be, because I don't think there really is going to be an easy fix to it. But I'm inviting more discussion about this, and that's one of the issues that I think would motivate it.
Can I add one quick thing on that? Real quick, I just wanted to add that the bottom line here is because of all the TV and all the exposure, schools actually compete for students through their athletes. In other words, schools win championships. Florida wins the national championship in football. Enrollment goes up 40%. So schools are utilizing that now, and with the media doing what it's done, it's hard to reverse that.
If I can just add sort of a point of interest. Number one is it sort of gets back to this idea of decoupling winning. So the NCAA gets all this money from this basketball contract, some of it going to the winners, but you could grossly, change what that formula is. The second thing has to do with when you're talking about this 14-year-old, something that really troubles me. It doesn't have to do with intercollegiate athletics, but our youth sports system right now is changing, sort of following a Tiger Woods model of younger and younger athletes getting more and more focused on their sport at a younger and younger age. And it's not good for that particular athlete. That's not how you make an elite, a really good athlete. It's not how it's done. Two is it's really bad for our society to be having a sports model system that weeds out the obese. It weeds out somebody with any kind of disability. It weeds out a late bloomer. It weeds out people who really could be great, but if you don't make that travel team by the time that you're 12 years old or whatnot, then you're out of the system. You're gone. So that's a slightly different topic. But anyway, just sort of the decoupling of the money with winning. I was an Olympic athlete. My funding source was mom and dad, and I can't imagine working any harder or wanting to win or giving up any more if there was $100 million on the line. People are going to want to win every bit as much. They're going to still want to root for their team every bit as much.
Okay, I think we have a question here. Yes.
Yes, my name is LeVar Johnson, class of '01 and former football player, Dr. Kennedy. I think I speak for, if there's any other athletes in the auditorium today. It's a conversation I have, as you well have also, Nancy, when I'm out and about, business world, traveling, why athletes aren't paid, etc. But I listen to you guys, and if I'm connecting the dots here with student athlete, economics, athletics, someone mentioned that sports is an entertainment. Duke is in the entertainment business. So I challenge the comment that $120,000 per athlete per year isn't necessary. Money talks, marketing, advertising. We invest in the right coaches, we get, in turn, the better athletes. We, in turn, get the better athletes, we produce a better product on the field, court, arena. In turn, we also will get higher academic students who are choosing between Duke, Yale, Harvard, Brown, etc. Why? Because the marketing of the product through athletics produces that person. As I talk to this young man, it's an added benefit to want to come to Duke.
Chris, you want to comment on that?
Hi, LeVar. You know, I'm sitting here listening to the talk about money and how big things have gotten and how distracting it is, and I'm contributing to it myself. But you know, this department has been my life's work. I think it's very, very hard to run an educational institution that's also in the entertainment business. And I think it's very poorly managed at a lot of places. One of the things that I'm proudest of, though, is that we're not perfect. We don't do everything as well as we can do it. But I think over the years, over my 30-some-odd years here, we've turned out exceptional student athletes, went on to graduate, went on to medical school, to law school, into business. You know, student athletes make up 1/10 of the student body at Duke. They're very visible, and we're proud of them. We're proud of how they present themselves, how they represent the university. You know, they're the ones that go out there and it literally says Duke on their body. And a lot of people get their first and strongest impression of this institution from those kids and from the way they comport themselves, from their sportsmanship, from their effort, from their determination and everything else. So that the balance between entertainment and education and the struggle to keep extracting the educational value from athletics never ends. And you know, just as a general observation, it never will end at Duke.
Yes. And then there's a person behind you in the back there, yes.
Andy Ash, class of 1966. There's been a lot of talk in the media these days about the advisability of sharing the revenues that the sports generate with the college athletes that participate in those sports. And Professor Clotfelter, you made a comment early on about how you felt that might have some deleterious effects, and I would like you to elaborate on that, why you think that might not be a good thing and what those effects might be.
All right, I'll just give you my economist's answer, and it's got two parts. The first thing is the economists have gone out to try to estimate what the economic value of a really good player is. They estimate that in football, a player that's going to be drafted in the NFL, so is that good, for each one of those in each year, it's worth about $500,000 to the university in additional revenue. So that's, and in basketball, the number is over $1 million. And that's the kind of number that causes people like Anthony Lewis to say, something's not right here. And you can't really look at it and say, this is fair, because everybody's working in the market except for this one crucial group of laborers, and they are the students. And so their payment is being artificially kept down. That's the reason why economists call NCAA a cartel. All right, so that's on one side. And so, okay, it's unfair. Now, that doesn't really tell you what the answer should be, because if you just do the mental experiment, we're going to outpay college athletes. Much of the mystique, much of the reality that is all about amateurs out there just fighting for their school, that goes away. And it's hard to know how that would affect things. We have brand names in this industry, is the way economists would talk about it, that are 100 years old. Michigan, Georgia, these are very old trade names. Ours is not as old only because the university is a little newer. And so part of the mystical and really appealing part of college is that these are kids. They're making mistakes that the pros wouldn't make, but isn't it great? And so you look at a tournament like this recent basketball tournament, one of the appealing things is so unpredictable. And let me finish following up Chris's statement. This university has been very fortunate in being run the way it is in the athletic department. If you want to say who's the hero of Duke athletics, it's the guy whose name starts with K, but it might not be the coach, it may be this guy here.
Yes, in the back there. The left side, yes. Behind you, behind you, behind you.
I'm Bill Arthur, class of 64, and I want to ask about the football bowl situation, but I'm not asking about should there be a championship playoff. It's also a money question. I've read recently that a lot of schools that go to bowl games actually lose money, and I've also read that a lot of these bowls make a lot of money. So the question is, if Duke were to start going to a lot of bowl games and lost a lot of money, would tuition for regular students have to go up to pay for that success? I mean, how does it work?
I'd like to be going to some bowl games.
This would be a good problem to have.
Although,
right?
yeah, I mean, the irony of it is, in some ways, is because of the way bowl revenue in the ACC is distributed, we actually come off better by not going to a bowl, and certainly because all the revenue goes into one pot and gets divided 12 ways, and so we don't have to pay the travel expenses or anything. I mean, Richard probably can speak more authoritatively on this. I don't really see the connection between going to a bowl and tuition increases. I mean, tuition increases are always going to be with us, bowl game or no bowl game.
And the only thing I'll add is the bottom line is you're right. The bowls do make a lot of money, and it's because of the guaranteed ticket sales. In other words, the schools have to pay for a certain number of tickets to each of these bowls at a very high price, regardless of whether they actually sell them. And it's really hard to sell them when you're trying to sell them at $200 and they're on one of these sites for $15. Then it's really difficult. And so schools lose a tremendous amount of money through that. And that's one of the reasons when we talk, and in the piece I wrote, the BCS 22 Tall Tales, it goes through it. One of their arguments is if you went to a different system, the bowls would go away. Well, they wouldn't, but one of the reasons they wouldn't is because bowls would still make the same type of money through their forced ticket sales.
Yes, down front.
Hi, my name's Risa Izzard. I'm not yet an alumna, but I hope to be as of May 2012. My question is for Ms. Hogshead-Makar. So I'm an ardent supporter of Title IX, so thank you for all of your work. And I know that some of the flack I get the most is that Title IX means that you're cutting men's sports to comply with Title IX, to which I respond to people that actually there are 3 prongs of Title IX, and that is actually, schools can comply with Title IX in other ways, and this doesn't stop people from arguing with me about, the 100% decrease of men's wrestling, especially, and other men's sports, and it makes headlines, Cal's baseball team and all these things. And in a class I'm in currently, we were talking a few weeks ago about Title IX, and one suggestion that came up was that perhaps there should be sort of a provision to Title IX that says that schools should not be allowed to comply with Title IX by cutting men's athletics. In that really you have to be increasing women's athletics. That's the point of Title IX, and schools shouldn't be able to take sort of this back road approach, this loophole approach, which I would argue is quite unfair to male collegiate athletes who haven't necessarily done anything to deserve that. And I guess I'm wondering how you would see that happening, if that's something that you or the Women's Sports Foundation would be behind. And then to Dr. Kennedy, what would that mean to an athletic department? I know that Duke doesn't have a history of doing that, but you know the numbers. How would schools look to comply? What would they do if they couldn't be taking this loophole approach?
Okay, first of all, I have a father, a brother, a husband, and a son who all love sports. So I get it, and I know how I would feel if my team got cut. I get it to the bones of my body, what that would be like. But I think that it's a big mistake to blame the law, and let me tell you why. We saw the exact same kind of thing happen in the 1950s when we had desegregation communities rather than integrating usually swimming pools and golf courses. Instead of integrating those two, they closed the facility down. Okay, and those cases went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. U.S. Supreme Court says that's okay as long as it's equally bad for everyone. Okay, so they have that choice to be able to bring the previously advantaged group down. But here's the difference between 1950s and now. Nobody in the 1950s said, oh, therefore we shouldn't have desegregation laws. We should be able to segregate in order to keep those swimming pools and golf courses open. Everybody put the blame where it belonged, on the community or the school. The community in that case that was closing these facilities rather than integrate. Okay, so when I talked about how that more money was not equaling more athletes, there's one place in all of education, one place only that's cutting right now, and that is Division I in the NCAA. So high school, Division II, Division III, which are much bigger than Division I, are the only place that are cutting sports. And what that group is doing is they're putting more money into fewer athletes. So it's really unfair to blame Title IX when a school chooses. Now, would I be in favor of some kind of rule that said that you couldn't cut a men's sport in order to comply? Absolutely. But that's not really appropriate for federal civil rights law. That's appropriate for the NCAA. They could adopt that rule tomorrow that said, hey, you can't cut men's sports in order to comply with Title IX or for any reason. I mean, they could have that rule. They also have rules that limit that say you have to have a certain number of men's sports and a certain number of women's sports. They could up that. They could say rather than 9, you've got to have 15, right? So they could make those kinds of changes to be able to up it. But it's really not a civil rights issue. That's a institutional type law, rule that could be changed to be able to do that. The vast majority of schools, to the neighborhood, about 77%, have not cut any sports to comply with Title IX or otherwise. But as Cal Berkeley they had a $12 million a year budget shortfall. At the same time, they had over 100 serious roof leaks. They had furloughs that had their professors making less than minimum wage. They had one person that was responsible for the entire Cal Berkeley grounds. They had major budget issues, so to have one group losing $10 million or $12 million a year, something had to give there.
Nancy, let me interrupt you because we're about to run out of time. I'm going to give Chris Kennedy the last word if you'd like to comment, and then...
Okay. I'm the one who is ultimately responsible for Title IX in the Department of Athletics. And, the Department of Education 3 prongs are useful as a kind of a metric to help you figure out how to get into compliance. But for me, what Title IX really means is what is it like to be a student athlete every day? 52% means nothing to a fencer. But what means a lot is the quality of your coaching, what her locker room is like, how they travel, how many kids have to sleep in a room on the road, just the day-to-day experience of being an athlete and a student at a place like Duke. And we pay attention to the numbers. We pay attention. We're never going to cut sports except at the point of a gun. We absolutely don't want to do that. And we want to maintain our broad-based program, which is one of the things we're proudest of, 26 programs. But we never want to lose sight of the fact that our student athletes have to feel every day in their daily lives, not that they're part of the 48%, but that they're being treated as well as they can be treated, and they're having the best experience they can have.
Okay, we have 1 minute, and I can take one last question if it's short, and if it elicits a short answer. So if we can do that. Otherwise, I'm going to thank you for being here. Charlie and Nancy will be available in the lobby. They'll sign copies of their books, and if you have questions that you didn't get a chance to ask and you want to ask one of the panelists, I invite you to do that also in the lobby. Thank you very much for being here.
Good job.
Thank you.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.